For UN Chief Antonio Guterres, humanity has a choice: cooperate or perish. He gave the strong warning at the COP27 climate summit in Egypt's Sharm el-Sheik. Every year, world leaders gather under this UN platform to lay out their commitments to tackle climate change. Türkiye, which has pledged to become carbon neutral by 2053, has undertaken a series of campaigns to meet those goals. But will it be enough? Let's take a look at this report.
We are on a highway to climate hell with our foot still on the accelerator.
And to further discuss the significance of the COP27 summit and Türkiye's zero waste project, joining me now from Arendal, Norway, is Svein Tveitdal. He is the former Assistant Executive Director of the UN Environment Programme. And from Manchester, Ruth Townend. She is a Research Fellow of Climate Risk and Diplomacy at Chatham House. A warm welcome to you both, and thanks for joining me on Straight Talks. So, Ruth, why is the COP27 summit important, and what to expect from this year's summit?
So the COP27 summit provides a rare opportunity for world leaders and negotiators to come together and discuss one or perhaps the defining crisis of our time. So climate change is something that affects all countries, and the multilateral system provided by the UNFCCC is a chance to work out what countries' responses will be and to raise ambition together so that we can address this problem. There are three key focuses for the meeting. So mitigation, finding ways to cut emissions and keep temperatures down. Adaptation, preparing for climate change which is already locked in and climate change that is still to come. And then loss and damage, so dealing with climate change impacts that can't or haven't been adapted to or avoided. And this is one of the defining challenges for the conference. So as we've seen over the summer, climate impacts are escalating. You've seen 33 million people displaced by floods in Pakistan and historic droughts in the EU and in America. So finding ways that the global community can support countries to respond to these losses and damages is really a vital issue of trust and progress at the summit.
Svein, at COP26 last year, high-income nations blocked a proposal for a loss and damage financing body. Is this year's summit likely to approve this plan? What is your expectation?
Well, if you take the issue about loss and damage, there are some good news from the startup of the conference. For the first time, loss and damage is on the formal agenda, and without being on the formal agenda, there is no way that there can come a real solution to this problem. So I think that is the most important thing we can have from this conference, that we started discussions on how rich and poor countries can contribute, and how we can have a financing mechanism to help poor countries with their loss and damage from climate change. We have an example, for instance, in Pakistan.
Yes, as Ruth said, 33 million people were displaced because of the flood. So, Ruth, how do loss and damage payments differ from the climate finance directed towards mitigation and adaptation?
So we have a huge problem with climate finance. Firstly, that existing promises of climate finance, so $100 billion was promised every year between 2020 and 2025 from rich countries to poor countries, and that has not yet ever been delivered in its entirety. So the whole climate finance mechanism is already undermined by that failure to deliver. And the second challenge is that the funds that are actually needed are vastly greater than this 100 billion. So we're already lagging on funding for adaptation and mitigation, and loss and damage really needs to be treated separately to these two funding streams.
So, Svein, some argue that its approval by states could trigger a wave of lawsuits by countries on the front lines of the climate emergency. Would you agree?
Well, there is no doubt about that. If you heard the Secretary General's statement yesterday, we can wonder, is it doomsday preaching or reality? He said that we are on a highway to climate hell with our foot on the accelerator. And this is really dramatic. But if you listen to what scientists are saying, this is the reality. And the reason why it is so important with these conferences, because this conference will maybe do something on loss and damage, but it will not be able to in a way, make a change in the scenarios on emissions and warming. So that will go on, and then damage to the poor countries will be more. Yesterday there came a new report from Nicholas Stern saying that in 2030 there is a need for $2 billion in climate funding for the poor countries. And as Ruth said, we haven't even managed to reach 100 million. We have reached 87 million. So we have a big problem. But also, you know, in 1 week, we will be 8 billion people on the earth. And many of those people, they are actually very poor, but they still do emit. So if we rich countries do not help them to get out of their problems with emissions and loss and damage, then we are in the same boat as Secretary General said. So the COP is a venue to try to sort out all this.
So, Ruth, how do you think has Turkey's efforts to boost renewables and fight the negative impacts of the climate change played out so far? Is Turkey a latecomer?
I think all countries need to do more on renewables. We're in a happy situation in that the cost of renewables has never been lower and the development of the technology has never been better. Another happy element of our position is that the lead times for developing new renewables projects are actually shorter than those for developing new fossil fuel projects. So we've seen a response to Russia's war in Ukraine of countries having a sort of second dash for gas, seeking to shore up their fossil fuel supplies, when in actual fact a response that focused more on renewables would be faster and also would future-proof our energy supplies so that we're not committing ourselves to fossil fuels for a long time into the future.
So, Svein, Turkey's Zero Waste campaign was first launched in 2017 and now is set to expand throughout the country in order to encourage recycling. But the question is, where does Turkey stand when compared to other European countries which have strict regulations on recycling? Is this a hard job to achieve?
It is a hard job to achieve, and I looked a little bit into the zero waste project in Turkey, and you ask about how is it compared with the European countries. Actually, your goal to recycle 35% will, if you reach it, bring you up amongst the best here. And that's probably also why you had this UNDP Sustainable Development Award, that in this case, Turkey can be a very good example. But if you take this into a climate change context, I think the emissions you have saved, you state 4 million tons is still less than 1% of the emissions in total per year for Turkey.
So
It's
a long way to go. So, Ruth, just one more question. What has changed, you think, since 2015 when COP21 delivered the Paris Agreement? Has there been a tangible progress in the fight against the climate crisis? And do you believe that all countries have done their fair share?
I think a lot has changed in the way that we talk about climate change and the awareness of climate change as a crisis. So in that time, I think it's moved from being seen as a fringe or technical issue by many members of the public to being a central concern, particularly among the youth. So a lot has changed, but we still have a huge gap in terms of progress. Emissions are forecast to rise around 10 or 11% by 2030, when the IPCC tells us that they need to fall by nearly half. So when Antonio Guterres talks about us having our foot still on the accelerator, that's what he means in terms of our emissions are still climbing when they need to fall. So COP27 has a huge job to do. We really do need to see transformative change at this conference.
All right, Svein and Ruth, unfortunately, we'll have to leave it here. Thank you very much for joining me on Straight Talk.